Welcome everyone to what is now becoming a monthly session, I'm very happy to say. And today I'm extremely excited to have these three exceptional US thought leaders joining ADOC CEO Elad Wallach for, I believe, a very interesting session about their experiences with AI. My name is Ariella Shoham. I'm ADOC's Vice President of Marketing. I will be your host. I don't have to introduce, I think, anyone to Zoom, but just in case you're not familiar, you will see the videos and the faces of everyone speaking. There won't be slides. This is a panel. You can chat to everyone throughout. I will be moderating the questions, and we'll see how we flow. I may ask our guests to respond to specific questions, or we may save this probably for the end. We're planning to run about 45 minutes and leave time for Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to ask each one of our distinguished guests to please introduce themselves before we jump in, and we'll go from left to right. Over to you, please, Dr. McGinty.
Thank you very much, Ariella, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this important discussion. My name is Geraldine McGinty. I'm currently serving as president of the ACR, but my day job is as a breast imager at Weill Cornell Medicine on the Upper East Side of New York City.
Thank you. Dr. Kotler.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me as well. I am also a radiologist. I've been practicing about 14 years now, and my specialty is in emergency imaging. I work for Radiology Partners as the VP of Clinical Operations.
Thank you. And Dr. Coleman.
Hi, I'm Cindy Coleman. I'm the chief of CT here at Cedars. I've been here for a very long time. Glad to be joining you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Elad, before you take over the reins, just let us know who you are.
Perfect. So my name is Elad. I'm CEO and co-founder of ADOC.
Thank you. So as I said, the chat's open. I'll be addressing your thoughts, and I'll hand it over to Elad to start this interesting panel. Have a great session.
Perfect. So let's dive right in. I am really excited about the panelists we have today. I think we brought people that both have a lot of experience with AI and a lot of thought leadership and thought through these items. And I think I'm really excited. I think we have a lot to learn from that experience. And I actually want to start with the initial question of what is the current and existing experience you have with AI. So Geraldine, if okay, we'll start with you. Can you share with us what's your existing experience with AI? What value are you experiencing? Or you could also talk about value you wish to experience in the near future.
So I'll be candid, I'm not using any algorithms in my day-to-day practice as a breast imager, although my organization is using some in other areas, and we're moving quite rapidly towards that in our breast imaging practice. Obviously, I suppose my perspective is more as a part of our national leadership in radiology, and the way in which we've wanted to really influence the implementation of AI in clinical practice to make sure that it adheres to our goals around improving patient care.
Terrific. And are there any specific areas of patient care you think would be ripe as first use cases that I would say you hear about often, or needs that arise from your leadership perspective?
Well, as you probably know, the ACR has really been much more vocal, I think, in recent years about the need to involve patients in care and making sure that their voice is heard. So I think we see ourselves as an important advocate for patients in this discussion. And I think that we also have a long history of making sure that we practice safely. You think about our mammography accreditation programs going back to the 90s, our appropriate use criteria. So the question of how we apply that expertise and how we are a voice in the ecosystem to drive safe and effective practice, and again, hopefully improve practice and improve outcomes, that's where I think that the real focus should be for us.
Yeah. I like it, and what I hear is a big focus seems to be on outcome and patient care improvement. That seems to be the focus with AI. Nina, from a very different perspective, I guess, private practice, what are your thoughts and experience with AI?
Yeah, when we first started thinking about AI, we thought about what component of AI is going to drive value. And from a very simplistic form, value, the value equation is quality over cost. So if you want to drive value in anything, and we were thinking about it specifically for AI, the goal is either to increase quality or decrease cost or do both. And when we were first starting to think about it, it was 2015, and quality was not really a term that people had defined very well in terms of what it meant for radiologists. Everyone was using operational metrics, and that really didn't define quality for us. So we actually thought about it in a different way. We thought about instead tackling variability. And if you can tackle variability, variability is the enemy of quality. It's the enemy of efficiency and cost. So if you can decrease variability, you're automatically going to increase value. And so that's where we thought about starting from. It was actually lower hanging fruit. And when you first start with AI, you want to have some success. And so we tackled variability in the radiology report. Our radiology reports are highly variable, especially the follow-up recommendations that we were giving. The ACR had come up with all these white papers and all of this great education about what we should be doing, evidence-based medicine, consensus. And it's just the way that it's organized in a journal, or it's a little bit separate from our daily workflow. And that's true for anything that we have. So how do we make that more attainable for the radiologists as they're working? And AI is a perfect place for that. So we tackled variability in these follow-up of what you should do based on ACR white papers and other evidence-based medicine. And that ended up working out really well. We didn't realize quite how variable people were. We looked first at incidental thyroid nodules, and it was essentially a flip of a coin if people were following the guidelines. For AAAs across our practice, it was only 4% of our radiologists were following the guidelines. And I mean, it's a kind of insane when you think about it. But at the same time, this is true not just in our practice, it's true across radiology. We actually had an academic center that we worked with, and they said, hey, we want to use your AAA guidelines. Will you kind of evaluate us, see how we do before and after? And they were at 0%. So this is a global radiology issue, and AI is a perfect place to assist with variability. You know, you try and think of what are the things that humans are really great at, and you want to maintain those, right? AI shouldn't be replacing those. But then think of things that humans are not as good at, and those are the things that AI can tackle. The other thing about value is that value, as they say, is in the eye of the beholder, right? So it depends on who you're speaking with. If you're talking with, when we talk with payers, value for them is about decreasing cost. Yes, everyone cares about quality, but value is about decreasing cost for them. When we speak with hospitals, I mean, they live on razor thin margins. And so what it's about for them is really how do you decrease their expenses, decrease length of stay, make sure more patients are coming into the system and staying in the system. And those are the things that they're thinking about. You talk to radiologists, and radiologists, of course, they're looking for quality. But when it comes down to it, if you are trying to really kind of sell a product, as Paul Chang kind of famously said, quality is like the floor mat of a car. It's expected to come with it. You don't pay extra for it. It should come. You know, we're radiologists. That's what we do, is we give a quality product. So these days, I would say value now is a little bit defined, at least from a radiology practice perspective, in being able to improve efficiency. And you can't do that at the risk of quality. You have to maintain or improve quality, but we don't have enough rads to go around, COVID aside, and that's not going to get any better anytime soon. So if you can look at decreasing variability, if you can look at improving efficiency, these are all things that drive value.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If I can share from our experience, it's very similar. The person who you need to sell to really drives what kind of value they're looking for. And one of the big insights, I guess, we had in this past year or so was that the impact on radiology has massive downstream implications, but they don't necessarily benefit from them. So if you can, let's say you have much better incidental thyroid nodule follow-up, or much lower miss rate, who really gains from that? Well, we all know that it's one of the challenges of the current fee for service-based health environment, and I totally agree. I think that the downstream impact is where it's actually where everybody, all of us in the ecosystem, needs to kind of try and find the ways where you can trickle down better radiology quality and outcomes, and how do you make money out of that. Yeah, sorry.
Our Anthony Gabriel, our COO, often says that we can spend a lot more money by just what we put in our impression than anything else. But it's not necessarily the immediate follow-up. We actually did that study for incidental thyroid nodules, and 35% of the time we were noticing that radiologists were recommending ultrasound follow-up. It's inappropriately when it didn't need to be, and that doesn't find any additional cancers. And if you look at the downstream costs of that, some of that's going to go on to an FNA and then surgery, and then people are going to be out of work and they're going to be on levothyroxine. So if you look at that cost, we extrapolated that across the US, and it's $300 to $350 million just for that one small thing.
Wow. Cindy, we'd love to hear your perspective as well.
Well, my perspective has kind of been shaped by the last 2.5 years that we have been actively using AI. And for us, it's really been a game changer. For me, as well as my colleagues across the board, neuroimagers, people who do ED imaging particularly, people who are working at night. And for us, it's really made a huge difference. So what it does basically is completely changed our workflow. We, as radiologists, we're constantly triaging. We spend a lot of our energy and brain waves triaging these huge work lists, hundreds of cases with the yellows or the ERs, the pinks, they're color coded, or the stats. I mean, everything, inpatient, this, and there's so much of that we're constantly having to, triage on our own. And what this does is basically, it's like giving you the diagnosis before you open the exam. So it's like having a list that says PE, C-spine fracture. And you don't want to do that. And I think it's an important thing, triaging, looking at those cases at the expense of the others. I mean, there's all kinds of layers of triage. I mean, certainly the ED cases, even the negative ones have to, or the ones that are not flagged, have to be looked at in a timely fashion. So we have all of those time pressures and stamps and things as well. But it enables us to create an accurate, actionable report in a shorter period of time. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve the quality with the hope that it's going to downstream impact patient care, but certainly all those other things, decrease ED length of stay, all those things like that. So, I mean, just as an example, so I do predominantly body imaging. If I'm looking at a pulmonary embolism case, CTA, I'll launch the case. There'll be 2,500 images, MIPS, MPRs, everything. And then what's critical is that the AI is integrated into the exam. It is ready and available when the study is launched. So I can look at that one image and know with pretty good confidence whether I'm dealing with a negative or a positive case. So obviously, if the case is positive, the first thing I do, which is critical, is confirm that. I find the image, I match it to the study, and I decide whether there's no autonomy here. I confirm, yes, I agree, or I don't agree. And then of course I have to look at all the other imaging. But if I agree, and it's a pulmonary embolism case, I type a wet read, off it goes, and within 30 seconds, the ED knows the patient has a pulmonary embolus. So, and for neuroimaging, even more so. I mean, we have a big stroke center, time is brain. So the critical finding of a hemorrhage or a large vessel occlusion, I mean, if you're making that diagnosis and the study is flagged, and that's, I mean, I can talk about that more later, how it's flagged, but it's easy. I mean, there's a big pop-up. I mean, you can't miss it, kind of thing. And you flag that study and you're making a huge impact on patient care.
Thanks for sharing. So we talked a bit about the benefits and the potential. So we talked about outcomes, reducing variability, efficiency, and in some specific use cases. But with with all those benefits, it's not for naught that AI has been fighting a battle to kind of get in the workflow, get into standard of care. And the direction of questions I'd like us to answer now is around those challenges and barriers. So what are the things we need to overcome when adopting or thinking to implement AI? Geraldine, would you like to start? I believe you're muted.
Yep, I had a fire truck going past. So thank you. Radiologists are innovators. It's in our DNA. We're at that interface of technology and humanity. And so I think in general, you find most radiologists very excited about the technology. But I think that one barrier for the practicing radiologist is this notion of a black box and something that they don't really understand. And if I'm going to use it to really rely on it, as Cindy points out, we'd like to see this always be something that augments us. But as you know, the ACR recently responded to an FDA question on autonomous AI. So there's enthusiasm about that. So I think we are reluctant to trust something that we don't understand. And I think, some of that reluctance is appropriate. And I think, again, these cross-disciplinary conversations around things like safety and how we protect our patients, how we put their interests first, perhaps, inform our conversations with some caution. And then I think there's just the reality of our complex and fragmented healthcare system. I'm sure Nina knows from dealing with practices across the country, just getting the attention of the CIO in a large health system. My own organization is in the middle of as you know, large implementation of Epic across multiple sites. And it's very difficult to raise a new tool for one particular department to the top of the agenda. So sometimes we find ourselves dealing with legacy systems and older tools when we see all these exciting things happening, simply because we're one part of a very large healthcare system.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, you're saying one of them would be just prioritizing and workflow implementation, making sure that we're aware of the risks and not jumping too far at the beginning, and keeping the patient care as at the top priority, and not make sure we sacrifice those, right?
And I think that this is a necessary tension and balance, right? We have to encourage innovation, and we want to really promote pushing the envelope, but at the end of the day, we really do have to make sure that we're preserving safety. And I'm not a data scientist, but really understanding where the potential is to fail, and what happens on the margins, and how do we have the appropriate checks and balances. And as I say, we've learned a lot of lessons about that balance between regulation and innovation through things like the accreditation program. And I think that's where, building on the relationships between regulators and practitioners and industries, those conversations are important, and I think we have to shore those up as we move forward into what for many of us is unknown territory.
Yeah, I totally agree. And by the way, I think that the idea of this being iterative really sits strongly in my mind, because we can't even fathom all the challenges or imagine what's going to happen. So it's about having this open communication, keep iterating, keep changing, keep learning, and then post-market surveillance, making sure we share the experiences, what's happening, what works, what doesn't work, what happens if you do it at scale, and now you have 100 different vendors, scanner vendors, and does it break, does it work? All of those different questions that I think only begin to emerge when you start implementing at scale.
I think just one more quick point is in the context of our national conversation about diversity, inclusion, equity, not wanting to repeat some of the failings in the past where we haven't necessarily had research cohorts that have been appropriately diverse, and how do we make sure that we're not implementing solutions that work for one segment of our patient population, but not necessarily as well for others. So another imperative, I think. Lots to do.
Yeah, agreed. Nina, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think it's the way Geraldine talked about it is very appropriate. It's really a balance. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I actually started off with a list of just a few things of why we don't see AI everywhere, and now I'm up to like 7. But it's not about that there's just so many problems to resolve. It's about knowing about them, thinking about them, and then being smart about it when we do the implementation. Because I think that AI is really going to transform what we're doing in radiology. But I think it's going to do it together. It's going to work together, a human with the AI algorithm, and also the practice or the group with the vendor. And I think those things need to come together for us to be successful and overcome all of these, now what I'm up to, 7 challenges. But the things that I think about are a lot of what Geraldine said. She talked about data and the underlying silos of data that we have. It's really hard to move stuff around. We have a lot of data. I mean, that's the good thing, but it's unstructured. And I don't know a lot of RADs that want to take their time to label it and make really high quality data. I think for a while, we just didn't have a very good business case for AI because we don't have a lot of extra money in healthcare. So who's going to pay for it? And people don't, you know, although we want quality, again, that's not something that a lot of people will pay extra for because it's expected. And so you really have to change the conversation to be something that people can pay for. And I think that's happening now. Even just the maturity of where we are in AI, and I think a lot of people know the Gartner hype cycle, but we're coming down off of that hype into an area of consolidation. And so how do you pick the vendor that's going to be around in a year or 2 years? How do you know who's going to be successful? And it's not necessarily the group that has the best algorithm. I think you have to really work with a group that's going to be a partner. And it's as much about the group as it is about their algorithms. I might even say it's more about the vendor and what they're like to work with as a partner than it is about the specifics of the algorithm. There's bias inherent in data, and so we need to be aware of it. Radiologists need to know what that bias is. The goal, of course, would be to have an unbiased patient population, but that's really difficult, and that's why it's so hard to take a model that's built in a lab somewhere and generalize it across the population. And even if you have, I mean, we build our own AI, so we build it for our patient population. But even when you do that, you have to make sure that you're following the data over time and that things aren't changing, because we live in a world of change in radiology and things are constantly evolving and changing. So how do you monitor that? AI is not really great at understanding context. I mean, you teach it the context and it learns that context. You teach it what a living room looks like. Suddenly you put an elephant in that living room and it calls it a couch, because that's not the context it understands. And humans are much better at extrapolating in that way. And so if you don't teach it a certain context, it might not know. And our environment is changing all the time. So our context is changing. We need to be aware of that. But I would say that the 2 more important things that not a lot of people are talking about these days, and sort of the last of my 7, are really about image or study orchestration. One of the things we don't think about, and I didn't really realize until we started piloting different AI tools, creating our AI tools, and realizing just how difficult it is to move both reports and exams around from one place to another, knowing exactly what those exams are, and not just because we're using the site procedure name, which is what everyone's using as the gold standard. How do you make sure you're sending the right image of the right series of the right exam to the right algorithm, and then validating that it's coming back with information, and then maybe sending to another algorithm, and doing all of that without wasting turnaround time, right? We don't want to interfere with patient care. And for that, you need some kind of image orchestration. And there are some groups, some vendors like you guys who really help with that. But that's not always the case. And so if you're working with a vendor that doesn't do that, then you need to have that capability yourself. And I think the way that we're trying to determine what's the right series of the right study to send to the right algorithm is not probably the best gold standard. Looking at the name of an exam or using a DICOM router to figure out what is the study that should be sent or the portion of the study should be sent is really a sort of a poor man's gold standard. And we need to really be able to change that. You guys are doing a great job with that. Not all the vendors are, so you have to really be able to manage and orchestrate your own data. And then the last part, which I think is really important, and you don't really notice until you start actually using AI, is in its deployment. A lot of tools work really well in a lab. A lot of algorithms look great. I mean, there was a paper that came out recently about Google's AI algorithm. I think it was the MIT review. And it said, hey, their AI algorithm for diabetic retinopathy detection worked awesome in the lab, but in real life, it was a different story. And that's true. That can definitely happen. These are clinical tools, and they need to be thought of as clinical tools. We need to make sure that as we roll out these tools, we're thinking not about a PACS upgrade that's just rolled out simply by IT, but it's rolled out by a group of people that's thinking about how do you deploy it, how do you manage it, how do you make sure the radiologists understand what it can do and what it can't do. And all these things we can tackle, but we really need to be thinking about them both when we create the software and when we deploy it.
100% agree. And Cindy, I know it's also close to your heart as well. So.
Absolutely. I mean, so here we have what the leadership of the group has felt. They found a great partner. We have a great tool. It's validated. And now I have to deal with the humans that have to use it. And, you know, at least we're past the, oh, we can't have AI. It will replace radiology. That's done. Now we went through the, well, it's not going to help me. I'm good at my job already. I don't want to look at more data. I don't want to change the way that I read. I'm efficient. I do this. I'm confident. And so all of those human elements, I mean, they, you know, like a PACS, all of these tools, VR and clinical guidance, critical tools. These are difficult for people to use and to adopt and to be comfortable with. I mean, we are humans. So all of those other things come with it. And I've dealt with a smaller group of, 10 or so body imagers plus all the other 30 radiologists that are using the algorithm. And I've heard it all. I mean, I've heard it all. I don't need the help. It's not going to help me. Okay, so one of my colleagues who I think is one of the most outstanding neuroradiologists, I mean, he's who I would ask to read my studies. He said, no, I don't, it's not going to be a big deal. 3 weeks later, he said, that was humbling. Subtle fractures, things that, are just, and to hear that from somebody who's got 30 years experience, I think is pretty amazing. Then there are people who, I don't want any more data. I have too much data. Don't make me look at something else. Well, once you start using the widget and you see the integration, you realize how easy it is. And ultimately, everybody really feels like it has enhanced their practice. But it was, it was not, you would think it would be simple. It's so much more simple than voice recognition and all these upgrades and any of these clinical guidance. Those are so important. But, this is like, you turn it on, there it is. It couldn't be easier. So I think once people started using it, they realized how easy it was to change what they were doing. And maybe it wasn't the best way to look at 100 cases on the work list in 12 different colors. And, you actually could use the help. So I think, it was really interesting to me, and people needed a lot. Some people needed more encouragement. I would call and say, hey, what'd you think of the widget today? What are the issues? And that's also been kind of interesting. I've had a very open dialogue with ADOC about certain things, configuring the widget, and they've been incredibly responsive. And I'm able to communicate, the issues that my colleagues have directly to them, and almost instantaneously get some kind of explanation, response, why it's working, what do we think? And that also, I think, has made people really feel invested in making it work because their suggestions and their input is responded to in an appropriate way, which is great.
Yeah. Nina, I know you have a strong, first of all, thank you very much, Cindy. And Nina, I know you have a strong theory about change management for these kinds of projects. Anything can share with the audience starting implementation of AI?
Yeah, and it kind of goes along with the idea that these are clinical tools, even though they're algorithms and you may think that it's an IT tool and you could have your IT department roll it out like you roll out a PACS or other upgrade, you really can't. We're working with clinical care, and we're working with humans, and humans in general don't like change. And Cindy, I think you explained that pretty well with the reactions of people, even if it's something that's great, like you know, here's change for the better, here's something that can be awesome. It's just something that's scary to us naturally. And so you have to deal with that and think of it in advance. And so when we roll out any of our tools, we roll it out with a change process, a change management process in mind. We talk about what it is. We're really transparent. We get people excited about it because generally we're not picking tools that aren't exciting, right? We're picking things that people would want to really use. So get people involved. The people that may be the ones that are the most worried about it, those are the ones you speak with, like Cindy is doing, and have them be the people that are getting other people excited about it. You have to follow some kind of change management. The other component I would say that's really essential about change management, well, two, besides getting people excited, one is having a person at your practice who's a local leader who can be a champion. Cindy, it sounds like you're the champion for this product. You need a local champion that can speak with the radiologist about it. And then number two is to make sure you can provide feedback to radiologists and that they have input in what this tool is doing, and so that they're getting responded to. If they don't like something, that they can be changed.
Yeah, great points. So putting the present aside for a second, so we talked about potential benefits, we talked about challenges. Where do we think AI is going? I know it's a broad question, but I'll try to focus it around standard of care. Do we think AI is going to be standard of care in the near future? Is it going to be a while? Does it have to make a huge leap before it becomes standard of care? Or do we think it's going to become a part of practicing radiology in the relatively near future? Geraldine, would love to hear your thoughts.
I'm going to go back to a somewhat pessimistic view of how we're able to change in the healthcare system, and disagree with myself. As we look at what has happened in the pandemic, we have accelerated the implementation of telehealth in general in a way that we never thought we could. So I guess the question is, what is going to be the stressor that's going to move radiology towards a faster implementation of AI? I'm not sure I know what that is, but I think Nina referenced the worldwide shortage of radiologists. I think that is going to be something, especially in low and middle income countries. And I think, you know, how we make sure that we, you know, implement preventive screening in countries where there simply aren't radiologists to read those images, that's where I think we may see a stressor that accelerates the implementation of AI. I'll agree with Cindy that I think in general radiologists are very enthusiastic about the possibilities, but how much we get to influence change, I think that's something that's in our hands, and that's clearly something we're trying to do at the ACR. How do we make sure that we're you know, advocating for change and influencing change in a system where perhaps we aren't necessarily always able to make decisions or making decisions in a larger system. So I haven't quite answered your question, but I don't know that I can put a number of years on it. But I think that certainly between the enthusiasm that radiologists have for innovation in general and the attention that we're paying to putting patients at the center and having the right kinds of conversations, I think that when we get there, I'm optimistic that we'll do so in the right way, because the worst thing would be to get there too quickly and do it in a way that wasn't safe and effective and didn't improve patient care.
Yeah, I agree. if I would say the way I hear what you're saying that the health ecosystem needs some help and guidance, I guess, and that helps with balance. On the one hand, we want to push innovation, make sure we're not stalling and getting the technology in, for better patient care as soon as possible. On the other hand, we want to make sure we ask the right questions to not, go too deep and God forbid, put patients at risk. Is that?
Great. That's you framed it beautifully. Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. Nina, would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I agree with Geraldine. It is a balance. I will say I do think it's inevitable. I do think AI is going to become a part of our workflow and a part of our standard of care because it can help us both improve quality, decrease cost, drive efficiency, all these things that we need in healthcare, and healthcare needs to evolve in that way. So I think it's inevitable. But when I think of where we are right now, and just going back to the Gartner hype cycle, we're still at a very early period. We're at a period where we're over the crazy hype, but we're coming into consolidation. And with that, the only people that you have working with the tool right now are early adopters. And that tends to be less than 5% of the population. And I think it takes a while. We're not at the bottom of that curve yet, where we're going to be in the plateau. I forget the name of it, the trough of disillusionment, right? We're not at the trough of disillusionment yet. It's going to take us a little while to get there. And once we get there, that's when we start building up and recognizing that, okay, now that we've had the experience, we can apply that experience and recognize, here's how we should be using the use cases. Here's how we should be validating. Here's how we need to follow what happens. And we just don't have enough experience with that yet. It's more anecdotal. I think it will take a couple to a few more years before we start seeing it more in the mainstream, and perhaps a little bit longer till we see it really everywhere.
And I have shared the Gartner hype cycle for the people that hasn't seen it in the past. Yeah. I agree. I agree completely. I think it's about the iteration and about learning each other. And Nina, I highly concur with the fact that it's about the relationship and working collaboratively and making the changes. I am biased to some extent, so I do think it will come earlier than we might expect, but or at least to some degree. But I agree that the major changes that we're anticipating coming from the AI space are still a few years away. Cindy, what are your thoughts about the future of AI? You're muted.
We've been at it since 2017. So I'm still excited about it. And I think that's, it's just been like I feel like it's been a tremendous gift. I do. Radiologists in general, our field is so tech driven. We got like all the techies, all the geeks, we love it. This is our crowd. And, we had a lot of early adopters. We had the humans, but I think most people are pretty excited about it. And, I'm sort of looking forward to the next solution, the next algorithm. And I think what's important and what everyone has talked about is you kind of have to evaluate your practice when you do this. What are your strengths? What are your challenges? And every practice has different challenges and pressures. And then again, what your opportunities are for growth, for research. And we found that we're, doing a lot of research, which is important. So we want to innovate and advance the field. So that's been important. And having this open line of communication with ADOC has been critical to doing that. And, having a comprehensive platform where, it's not just the breast imagers or the body imagers. We have, every radiologist in the practice is finding value in it. And I think that's also really important. So I'm still really excited about it. All of these issues are important. I mean, the whole point of it for me, yes, it changes my workflow. All of those things are nice, but ultimately I feel like I'm giving better quality care. And it's kind of why I'm here. So I'm excited to see what comes down the line, and I'm glad to be part of, the development of the future.
Amazing. So we're actually at the planned time to start opening for questions. So I'll let Ariella take it from here in a second. But I must say that for me, this has been a really exciting discussion because it's combined a few different perspectives. Very high level where the industry should go, talking very practically about what's happening right now and what are the use cases and where people start seeing value. And for me, obviously, as a vendor in the space, it's really exciting because it's not, people ask me, so we got, right now we have 5 FDA clearances. So people ask me, okay, is your product developed and now you're, running with it? My answer is kind of hell no. We're in the middle of the R&D development. So yes, it's in there, it's providing clinical value, it's running, but there is so much work to do and iterate. And I think that's what's exciting for us as well. We're in a very dynamic field. So if anybody has anything to add, or we'll let Ariella take lead.
So first of all, thank you very much to the 3 of our speakers. I thought it was extremely interesting, and thank you, Elad, for hosting it. We have a few minutes for questions, and then I'll also give you each a few minutes for final thoughts. So one question, and I'm just going to address this to all of you, and you can, whoever wants to take it. It's a question about reimbursement. How will reimbursement need to change to support the appropriate acceptance of AI? And then the run on that is along with the right quality measurements. So we talk about this a lot. So who volunteers? Maybe Gerald. I don't ever want to put this on you, Geraldine. Who wants to volunteer maybe to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the big question. I mean, we've had this discussion in healthcare in general for so many years. How do we pay for value, not volume? What are the appropriate metrics? And Nina referenced this. A lot of our metrics are process metrics, the trying to find those elusive outcomes metrics. But so in some ways, the imperative around AI is no different than anything else we do. But I think that if we look at some of the ways in which our existing reimbursement system hasn't necessarily supported our efforts around quality and better outcomes, you really want to think we'll try and do better with AI. Where in fact AI fits into the payment methodology, I don't want to bore everyone to death, and that's a whole other discussion. But I think that this has to fit into the ongoing efforts that we have around looking for metrics that really do differentiate high value imaging and really incentivize us, because there's no doubt that what we get what we pay for in healthcare. So if we don't pay for things the right way, we won't get the outcomes we want. So a real opportunity, I think, to do better across the entirety of what we do.
Thank you, Geraldine. Any other thoughts on RIM? Yeah, it's a challenging topic, so I think that was addressed well. I have another question. It came up pretty early about privacy and protection of data. Who sort of I don't know, maybe Nina, do you want to take this, or Elad, do you want to talk about AI in general? Well, you can share it both, maybe Nina.
It just depends. Privacy and protection of data. We've got HIPAA guidelines here in the US, and in Europe there's different guidelines, and everything is state-based. We actually did an evaluation because our practice goes across multiple states to figure out, well, there's ethics, but there's also some legal components of who owns the data. And it really depends. I think it was New Hampshire. If you live in New Hampshire, the patient owns the data. If you live in any other state, then it's whoever creates the data. I mean, I'm talking in generalities because each state's a little different, but who creates the data owns it. So if you have your own imaging center and you're actually creating the data, then you own that data, and then maybe have more ability to move it around. I would say from a privacy standpoint, hopefully we've been very well educated through HIPAA about being careful about sharing any privacy data. There's a lot of algorithms that are out there that can de-identify things, whether it's embedded onto an image or in the radiology report, and we always have to be careful about doing things like this. The other question is really around ethics. And should we be using patient data in this way? I mean, even if legally you created that data and hence you own it, is it ethical for us to be using that data and maybe using it for gain? There's a lot of discussion on that right now. Rain Geis wrote a great paper with a few other people, and I encourage people to read that. I think that's an ongoing discussion. It might take a whole hour in among itself, but it's a really important one.
Thank you, Nina. Any other thoughts on data? I think that was, thank you very much. So we have
I just add, Ariella, that you know, Elad's question about the future, it's hard to predict where we were, but I think as we look at the way in which we think about patients' involvement in research or as research subjects and their data, I think we will do well to think ahead and really try and make our patients part of the conversation, make this as much as possible a shared decision-making, a shared innovation with our patients, because we may not necessarily, as you said, Nina, always, we may be able to do it legally, but you know, sometimes there are concerns that go beyond that.
Thank you, Geraldine. So we have Dr. Wald on, he's on mute, but he's typed an interesting question. Elad, do you want to read through it and maybe give us some of your thoughts, and maybe some of our panelists can share their thoughts as well?
Yeah, of course. And I see he typed another question, so I'll read both of them. They're actually both very interesting. So the first one is, as AI deployed in practice scales, which means more vendors, more algorithms, we need standard interfacing and common presentation states of results from AI within the production systems, which includes diverse packs, fixation systems, etc. There's a lot of opportunity for professional association industry to collaborate around that. So that's one thing when thinking about the ecosystem standardization of presentation states. On a similar note, although different, there is also the topic of post-market surveillance, and the comment was that comparison of their results with local radiology generated ground truth, image markup, and ongoing collection is critical. So collecting and analyzing the feedback from actual practice in line with the FDA and the daily practice is really critical, both for initial acceptance as well as ongoing surveillance. So the post-market surveillance of AI is really key, and we all know the papers, and we all talked about the difference between lab and real world. Any comments or thoughts around those two? I know that both of these topics are near to my heart as well.
I can start. So, you know, being in a large radiology practice going across multiple states, we have felt that. Our data is not standardized in any way, and it makes it a lot more difficult to utilize AI. When you want to utilize AI, you know, just like any IT tool that you want to utilize it at scale. And to do that, it's best if everything looks the same and sounds the same and smells the same. But you know what? Our data is not like that. It's kind of like a messy pile of dishes, and it's all different. And that's kind of how we all have grown up in radiology, right? Everyone has their own way of doing something and their own way of naming something. You can even name something at the CT scanner. So there's no standards by which we are ensuring that everything is the same. Even some of the standards we have some flexibility within them. So yes, that is something that makes it extremely difficult to utilize really any system at scale, and especially utilize AI, because for AI, you've got to move images around, you've got to move data around. And to do that, you want to have some kind of standards. Unfortunately, that's been slow. I would suggest that if anyone's going to get involved with AI, that they look at their own infrastructure and start working on that. I agree, if we could work with industry to create some kind of more global infrastructure that we could use across the US, that would be, or even across the world, that would be fantastic. Because a whole bunch of individual practices or groups are not going to necessarily be able to do it on our own. There have been some efforts to do that. So far, it has not really been that successful, but we can only be hopeful about the future. So yes, totally agree. The other part of market surveillance is also important. Once you implement a tool, it's not a one and done. Your data can change. Maybe you get a new protocol, maybe you get a new scanner, maybe a different kind of patient comes into your ER and you're suddenly scanning a little bit of a different patient population. Maybe you have different physicians reading in different ways or different kinds of studies being ordered. There's so many ways that our data can change, and the data was only trained on what it was trained on. So you need to make sure that you are following what is happening and the quality of that algorithm or whatever you're using over time. That is really important to have post-market surveillance that continues for the life of the product.
Yeah, and one, Nina, you spoke about the hidden challenges that people only start to see when things, hit the real world. One of the topics that we really think about nowadays is consolidation of results from different algorithms. What do you do if you have, let's say, chest exam with 5 different algorithms? Let's even say from 5 different AI vendors. What are you going to now have 5x the amounts of false positives, which basically almost every exam is going to have, a false positive of some sort? How do you consolidate these results and make sure it's all seamless to the user? Really not trivial challenges. I think the standardization is the first piece, but a piece out of the whole consolidation issue, which is massively challenging. And I think we're going to have to solve this as AI scales. I agree.
Right. And as a user of those tools, you want to be able to know where are those tools going to fail. And if you have multiple different algorithms from different vendors that have different points of failure, it's really going to be hard to keep that in mind. And so we're going to need a tool that helps us with that. Yeah, I think these are the issues that you don't recognize until you start deploying. And while I do think there's definitely some early adopters that are deploying maybe one algorithm at a time or a few algorithms that are separate, I don't see a lot of people that are sending one study to another algorithm to another one. And when we do that, we're going to identify new challenges.
Yeah. Any more comments from Geraldine or Cindy on this?
No, I will say that I think Christoph's points are very well taken as chair of our ACR's Informatics Commission. And certainly I think understanding, as Nina said, what this looks like when you're dealing with a heterogeneous practice situation. Look, we're still making patients carry CDs around between practices, so we have ways to go.
Definitely. And I do want to be respectful of the time, so we'll have room for one more question. Maybe, so there is another question also from Christoph, which I think is interesting. So the label of FDA clearances may be misleading to the marketplace, especially with generalizability. AI works one place, does it work in others? How, and the question is for everybody, I can talk from our angle, but how do you communicate this to the broad ecosystem and be transparent with that? And I'll share my perspective real quick. I think that the challenge here is exactly the challenge of education. And I think all of what the ACR is doing, and I would say everybody in this forum is doing about educating about AI limitations and benefits, I think that's key, because if you don't understand, I heard, Geraldine, maybe you know more, but people talking about an AI subspecialty. I don't know if that has any meat to it, but at least educating around it, I think is key. What do you think?
Look, I mean, I think, it's very easy to get caught up in the hype, and, in your world, Elad, where you have to have conversations with investors, and, that's a different conversation. And as we've seen with sort of the progress around some of the therapies and a vaccine for COVID, sometimes things happen a bit more slowly than we would like. So I think we have to steel ourselves to be rigorous and to really, expect results and better outcomes. in terms of the education and how we interface this into existing training, I mean, that's definitely happening. I think that's where it's going to be really important to make sure that we're bringing our entire radiology training program ecosystem up to speed at the same time. I mean, not every program is a large academic program with data scientists on board. So we absolutely have to make sure that practicing radiologists have an understanding of this. But not everyone's going to be, you know, a data scientist, but we have to, as Nina said, and Cindy said, we have to be intelligent consumers. So definitely role for education.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have 2 minutes, so I just want to be conscious of everyone's time. Sorry, Nina. So over to you, and then parting thoughts before we let everyone go. So sorry, Nina, you're just going to say something.
Oh, I just wanted to wholeheartedly agree with that. I mean, the FDA has a great role, but there's no way that they can understand how a tool is going to work in your environment. It's just impossible. So we have to be very aware consumers, work closely with the vendors to make sure that we're doing the best for our patients.
Yeah. So really, I wanted to thank all of our panelists and actually the audience. We had a breakthrough amount of audience members this time that stayed up until the end. Thank you very much to all 3 panelists. It's been a really exciting discussion, and I hope we continue the dialogue throughout the years.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.